I received a game key for Mortanis Prisoners from Axios Games Entertainment for review purposes. Mortanis Prisoners is a first-person survival horror game developed by Alexei Bulgakov and Vladimir Zlobin and published by Honor Games. It originally launched on July 23, 2025 for PC, with PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X and S versions arriving on February 20th, 2026. On the surface, it is a straightforward indie horror title, with some rough edges in animation and presentation. But once you settle into it, the way its systems connect starts to shine. It pulls inspiration from classic survival horror design, especially the slower puzzle-driven structure you might associate with older genre staples, and delivers a compact experience that is easy to finish in a sitting or two. The game is set in a World War II Third Reich concentration camp, where prisoners are planning a rebellion. When the leadership discovers the uprising, they order a complete execution of everyone involved. You step into the role of Justina, a Polish resistance member whose cover has been blown. She wakes up in a morgue surrounded by death and quickly realizes something far worse than execution is unfolding. As you move through the camp, the setting shifts into something that feels closer to purgatory than reality. Nazi guards still roam the halls as phantoms, but supernatural horrors have also awakened. Notes scattered around the environment provide context about the failed rebellion and the strange forces at work. The narrative is simple and never dives especially deep, but it gives you a clear objective: escape. That clarity helps keep the momentum going even when the storytelling itself feels a bit thin. This is more atmospheric than terrifying. There are very few traditional jump scares, and nothing feels designed purely to make you flinch. Instead, the horror comes from tone and imagery. You might pass a corpse strapped to a bed that later becomes writhing in pain, only to vanish when you return. You might round a corner and find a creature sobbing to itself. Windows are blocked by grotesque masses of fused bodies, which is disturbing in an unsettling way. That said, you will still get caught off guard. Enemies sometimes rush around corners or sneak up behind you when you think a hallway is clear. The tension mostly comes from uncertainty and from navigating tight, shadowy spaces where sound matters. It is gritty and claustrophobic, and that mood carries the experience, even when the scares themselves sometimes don't. The core gameplay loop is simple. You explore rooms, solve puzzles, unlock doors, and deal with enemies that get in your way. The design will feel familiar if you have played classic survival horror. You might enter a room that requires weighted objects to progress, which sends you searching for a key. That key leads to another locked space that requires fuel, and the fuel is blocked off by yet another environmental obstacle. It becomes a chain of interconnected tasks that slowly open up the building. This could easily become frustrating, but it generally works because the map is compact and logically laid out. Backtracking is frequent, yet manageable. As the environment changes over time, previously visited areas feel slightly different, which keeps the repetition from dragging too much. It is not revolutionary puzzle design, but it is functional and it fits the tone. Combat is direct and grounded. Early enemies can be handled with their knife, but you eventually gain access to a handgun and later a shotgun. Ammunition is limited enough to encourage restraint, though not so scarce that you are constantly stuck. You will find ammo all around, and sometimes discover keys that unlock stashes. Inventory upgrades allow you to carry more items, which becomes important when juggling puzzle objects and healing items. Enemies are fairly basic in behavior. Most rush you and swing once or twice before going down, but they hit hard enough that you cannot ignore them. Later sections throw multiple threats at you at once, pushing you to move carefully and use your resources wisely. Safe statues and storage boxes are placed throughout the map, letting you manage supplies and recover. For the most part, the systems feed into each other in a satisfying way. Exploration leads to keys, keys lead to ammo or upgrades, and upgrades make combat and puzzles smoother. Visually, the game shows its indie roots. Character models and animations are dated, and one mid-game cutscene in particular highlights awkward camera angles and stiff pacing. Texture pop-in and small glitches appear from time to time. However, optimization on PS5 is strong overall, with stable performance and smooth frame rates. Where the visuals succeed is in atmosphere. The camp is washed in browns and dark blues, creating a heavy oppressive tone. Fog effects and blood splatters add grit. Some later areas introduce more color than you might expect, which helps break up the monotony. The environmental design does a lot of heavy lifting, even if the technical fidelity is not cutting edge. The audio is understated but effective. There is limited voice acting, and what is there is serviceable enough that you might wish there was more of it. Ambient sounds carry much of the tension. Enemy grunts, distant shifts in the environment, and subtle background noises reinforce the claustrophobic feel. The soundtrack is not particularly memorable, but it supports the mood. Nothing stands out as iconic, yet nothing actively distracts either. It wraps the experience together in a way that feels appropriate for a smaller scale horror title. The game is short. Once you know the solutions, you can finish it in roughly an hour on repeat playthrough speedruns or if you are going for achievements. Some may find the puzzles too simple. Others might get stuck on one or two that are poorly explained. Loading screens can be longer than expected, and occasional glitches, like enemies getting stuck in corners or clipping through geometry, remind you that this is not a big budget production. The story also feels like it could have gone further. The premise is strong, but the payoff is minimal. You set out to escape, and you escape. There's not much narrative expansion beyond that. Mortanis Prisoners is a middle-of-the-road survival horror game that leans heavily on atmosphere. It's certainly not polished, but there is something appealing about how its exploration, light resource management, and grounded combat come together. If you enjoy short indie horror games that focus more on tone than spectacle, you will likely find value here, especially at a reasonable price. It is not a must-play, and it is not especially scary, but it is a solid, focused experience that shows potential. With stronger storytelling and more refined mechanics, a follow-up could easily build on what works here. As it stands, Mortanis Prisoners is decent, sometimes rough, but ultimately worth a look if you are in the mood for a compact survival horror escape. I give Mortanis Prisoners a 6.5 out of 10.